Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fall. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
Oh, everybody meet Felix Sater. Here he is, being named, and this is important, Chabad's Man of the Year. Is that close? Chabad? Yes, because phlegm is a vowel in Hebrew. Just saying. So this is Felix Sater accepting an award in New York City, in Brooklyn, I think, from a rabbi who is in awe of Felix Sater because Felix Sater had told the rabbi all these stories of, like international intrigue and spying and being a double agent. And the rabbi thought he had read too many John Clancy novels. But then Felix Sater was actually honored by our intelligence community. And the honor was so secret. It was such a secret ceremony in the bowels of the intelligence community that Felix Sater was only allowed to invite his immediate family and one other. He invited this rabbi because he had told this rabbi these stories for so long. And the rabbi was like, yeah, right, Felix, whatever. And it's very interesting, like what Glenn Simpson testifies to about all the infiltration into conservative groups in the United States. One of the groups that Simpson was, very shocked by, let's say, infiltration-wise by the Russians. Well, there were a handful of them, but one of them was Chabad, the Jewish diaspora, all of us Russians, the Ukrainian community and all my Russian friends that live in Brighton Beach. That's where Felix Sater grew up. There is this very Russian community in Brooklyn where, I'm from, called Brighton Beach. And most of the Russians who are fleeing Russia or who are coming here to secretly do Russian business, they all go to Brighton Beach, and that's where Felix Sater grew up. Anyway, make a long story short, Chabad actually, was invited to the bowels of the intel community so that Felix Sater could get this award. And then after the rabbi learned that Felix Sater was a double agent, they made him Chabad's Man of the Year. The other conservative group that you might have heard that was infiltrated by the Russians was the National Rifle Association. Oh, yes, the NRA. The Russians have been infiltrating and embedding themselves with conservatives in this country for a very, very long time. But here's Felix Sater, in case you've never seen him or in case you don't know anything about him, accepting the award in Brooklyn from the rabbi.
Not something that I expected. The rabbi gave me the Rebbe's dollar. I owe him one back. A while back, he gave me one, and to carry with me for safety, protection, for blessings. And I think that now that I have one that I could put in my house, which is like a mezuzah for the house, now my whole family can be protected and watched over. I'd like to give you back the one you had given me a few years ago for my protection. It's truly an honor to be standing in front of all of you, to be given this award, to be given this recognition. It's an honor to serve on this board of this organization. The people that are on the board are amazing human beings. Rabbi Paltiel has described most of them to you here. Other than just the board members, there's a lot of people who make this place run so that people can come, so that they could pray, so that they could cry when they have bad moments, thank God for good moments. And I think that the most important thing that a person could have, and especially a Jew, is this feeling of what I hope I have, or at least I strive to have it, something called tikkun olam, which is repair the world or make it a better place than you found it. I truly hope that in the very distant future, when I'm no longer here, that somebody will look and say, he did. He... And I think that that's probably my connection to the Rebbe, who I met as a child a few times. As you all know, I'm not a very religious person, but I feel I have a connection. I always go to the Rebbe's gravesite. I always ask for things, and I always seem to wind up getting them. My life has been beyond interesting. My wife says living with me is like reading next week's newspaper today.
So that's Felix Sater, and it's just so interesting that, he surrendered to the FBI in 1998 after, it was obvious that he was running a pump and dump scheme on behalf of the Russian mafia. And when he came back, he surrendered himself and became an informant. And then shortly thereafter, he ends up working with Donald Trump. And the man who turned him, Andrew Weissman, is one of the first hires made by Robert Mueller when investigating Trump. Now, Weissman is an expert on financial crime and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. He was counsel to Robert Mueller when Robert Mueller was the head of the FBI. And the cases that they have been involved with are, what that Weissman's been involved with, it's almost all Russian mafia. And so in 1998, the FBI was on the trail of Felix Sater for a pump and dump scheme, scamming customers and other stock manipulation schemes and laundering money. $40 million he laundered. And it included members of various Italian crime families and Russian mob families. So let me stop there. And let's look at Glenn Simpson's testimony about Felix Sater and about Donald Trump and, what the ties were and why they became interested. Okay, this is Trey Gowdy questioning Glenn Simpson. Trey Gowdy, as you know, pointy hair himself, is really only interested in, finding fault with Glenn Simpson and Fusion and the payments to Fusion by a Democratic law firm named Coey Perkins. But he asks a question and Glenn Simpson says, no. This was when the Republican Paul Singer at Free Beacon hired us. This was one of the first things we found. This is on the entire testimony is on randyrhodes.com/homework. It's on the homework page. And I put it up near the top so that you could follow along if you want to. This is on page 23. Ready? Trey Gowdy. He's asking about Chris Steele and how they got together. And he says, we worked together since 2009. I've known him. We worked together on a lot of different things, because when Simpson was in 2009, he was a Wall Street Journal reporter, and his beat was Russian mafia and Russian mob crime and Russian money laundering and things of that nature. And then the Wall Street Journal seemed to lose interest in this whole thread of Russian crime in New York, where the Wall Street Journal is. And so he decided that he wanted to continue doing this kind of reporting. So he left the Wall Street Journal and he opened up this company. All right. So Gowdy says, well, how did he come to work on the project? Talking about Chris Steele. He said, as I said, we've done other things together. And at the very beginning of this project, one of the very first things that I focused on was Donald Trump's relationship with a convicted racketeer named Felix Sater, who was alleged to have an Russian organized crime background. And over the course of the first phase, see, Trey Gowdy doesn't want to hear this. He wants to hear, what Coey Perkins and the Democrats paid for, but this is what the Republicans paid for. He says, and over the course of the first phase of this, or the first project, we developed a lot of additional information suggesting that the company that Donald Trump had been associated with and Felix Sater Bayrock was engaged in illicit financial business activity and had organized crime connections. We also had sort of more broadly learned that Mr. Trump had longtime associations with the Italian mob, crime figures. And I'm sure this is the human source, okay? Because this is what Felix Sater came from, right? He said, and as we pieced together the early years, it seemed as if during the early part of his career, he had connections to a lot of Italian mafia figures, and then gradually, during the 90s, became associated with Russian mafia figures. And so all of that had developed by the spring of 2016 to the point where it was not a speculative piece of research. It was pretty well established. And Mr. Trump had quite memorably attempted to downplay his relationship with Mr. Sater in a way that I found, frankly, suspicious and not credible, saying he wouldn't recognize him on the street, but there were pictures of him together. This is what Glenn Simpson watched. It's a publicly available deposition of Donald Trump in 2013.
We weren't doing much with him. We were dealing with Bayrock. We weren't doing much with him. So I don't think
he's talking about Felix Sater. Okay, the lawyers question him about his relationship with Felix Sater.
We weren't doing much with him. We were dealing with Bayrock. We weren't doing much with him. So I don't think it made much of a. I think this was maybe the article where it talked about the barroom fight, actually.
Okay.
But I vaguely remember it.
Okay. Do you remember ever discussing the content of this article with him?
With Mr. Sater?
Mr. Sater, yeah.
No, I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Did you ever discuss at any point issues relating to the barroom brawl?
Not that I remember.
Okay. About how many times have you conversed with Mr. Sater?
Over the years?
Over the years, if you could estimate.
Not many.
Not many.
If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like.
Okay. So when you say not many, I mean, can you count that on one hand?
No, I wouldn't know what to say about that because I don't know. He would call. I think he dealt mostly with my company, not with me.
Okay.
But if he would call, I'd take his call because he was representing Bayrock. He was an official. He wasn't the boss. He was an official of Bayrock. I mean, you should ask these questions to Bayrock. He worked for Bayrock. He didn't work for me.
There are emails that actually say that Felix Sater is Bayrock. Okay, but that aside, let's continue with the Simpson testimony. He said, I found that frankly suspicious and not credible that he wouldn't recognize him, saying he wouldn't recognize him on the street, but there were pictures of them together. And the other people around Bayrock were also from the former Soviet Union and also had associations suggestive of possible organized crime ties. One of them is a guy named Tevfik Arif, A-R-I-F, he spells it, who it turned out his real name was Tofik Ariflov, and that he was an alleged organized crime figure from Central Asia. Now, when we're talking about Central Asia, I want you to understand we're talking about Kazakhstan. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but last week Trump hosted the president of Kazakhstan, like flaunting it in front of everybody's freaking face. Anyway, he said, so there was that. And then, he was also increasingly saw that Mr. Trump's business career had evolved over the prior decade into a lot of projects in overseas places, particularly in the former Soviet Union, that were very opaque, and that he had made a number of trips to Russia, but said he'd never done a business deal there. And I found that rather mysterious. And so I had the perfect person to go see if they could figure out what was going on there. And so that's how I decided to ask Chris if he could look into it for me. That's how Chris Steele came in. Let's review Felix Sater one more time. In 1998, the FBI was on the trail of a criminal investigation, a criminal enterprise. Sater had left for Russia. He was working there as a consultant for AT&T. And he came back to the United States and surrendered him to the FBI. And this Andrew Weissman, who Mueller hired very early on, is the guy who turned Felix Sater into an FBI informant. And the only place that information could come that Trump was all, like Italian mob and then transferred over to the Russian mob, not the only place, but a good place, a good bet would be that it came from Felix Sater. And that would be the human intel inside or a person talking to the Trump campaign. Adam Schiff is now doing the question because Trey doesn't like these answers. Trey Gowdy doesn't like these answers. He turns it over to Adam Schiff pretty quickly. And so Adam Schiff says, so during the period of time you were working for the Free Beacon. Now, this is important to the Congress members because Trey Gowdy is trying to say you did this for the Democrats and only the Democrats. And Glenn Simpson is saying, no, this happened early on. And I was still working for, Singer and the Free Beacon. They were the ones who were paying us. And so that's when I reached out to Chris. And that's when I said, this Sater guy, he's, telling us stuff. And anyway, so Adam Schiff says, so during that period of time, you were working for the Free Beacon. You came across some of the first information about candidate Trump's business ties in Russia, including those with Felix Sater? Answer, yes, that's correct. And a lot of other issues came up during the primaries that raised concerns in my mind about whether there might be connections. Donald Trump might have unexplained connections to Russia or people involved in that part of the world. I mean, among other things, eventually, Paul Manafort was appointed to the campaign as the first convention manager and then the chairman or the campaign manager. And I knew a lot about Paul Manafort from my career at the Wall Street Journal. I'd written a number of stories about his involvement with Oleg Deripaska and the pro-Russian party in Ukraine and another oligarch named Firtash. And I had even written a story about whether he should have registered as a foreign agent. And all that occurred years earlier. So when he suddenly surfaced, I was, struck by that. And then Adam Schiff says, if you would go through some of the stuff, the Russia-related things that concerned you, that you learned in the first phase while you were doing work for the Free Beacon, as best you can recall. And remember, Glenn Simpson is saying that everything that he relied on was either a human being inside the Trump campaign or somebody talking to the Trump campaign or publicly available, worldwide, though, business deals, financial documents, or depositions and lawsuits that Trump was involved with, which are all publicly available, but nobody bothers to, not bothers. I mean, you would need an entire firm to do this kind of research. You would. You'd need, I can't tell you how many people it would take, like more than a newsroom.
I don't think he was connected to the mafia. He got into a barroom fight, and in fact, he was supposedly very close to the government of the United States as a witness or something, but I don't think he was connected to the mafia. He got into trouble because he got into a barroom fight, which a lot of people do. I don't, because I don't drink. But I don't think he was connected to the mafia. But, again, I don't know him very well, but I don't think he was connected to the mafia.
About how many times have you conversed with Mr. Sater?
Over the years?
Over the years, if you could estimate.
Not many.
Not many.
If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't think he was with the mafia. I thought he was. This is in 2013, okay? Felix Sater is long gone from the Trump disorganization. Long gone. He worked with Felix Sater from 2002 and saw him, his office was in Trump Tower. Felix Sater's office was in Trump Tower. His business card said senior advisor to Trump. And that was 2010. Now, this lawsuit, this is for fraud. This is for fraud. People wanting their money back from Trump Soho, a Bayrock project that Felix Sater and Donald Trump and Jr. and Ivanka all worked on together. This case was eventually settled. Donald Trump doesn't settle. He settled it. But here in this deposition, he's denying, I don't think he was with the... Of course, everyone knew he was with the mafia because there was a money laundering scheme. It was written about in newspapers, and Trump knew it. Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.